Welcome to the Central Mind Podcast, and I'm your host, Tony DeVito, where we try and get to the middle ground of almost anything. None of the information provided in this episode should be construed as legal or medical advice. We at the Central Mind Podcast, our guests, affiliates, or any of their affiliates are not liable for any actions taken or decisions made by you from the information provided in this podcast. Please advise an attorney for any legal advice and a medical professional for any medical advice. We have a more detailed disclaimer available to you under the description of this episode. All right, we're going to jump right in and we're going to talk about whether or not recreational marijuana should be legalized in the state of Florida. First, I'm going to go ahead and read directly from the Amendment 3 on the Florida ballot. Here we go. Adult personal use of marijuana allows adults 21 years or older to possess, purchase, or use marijuana products and marijuana accessories for non-medical personal consumption by smoking, ingestion, or otherwise. Allows medical marijuana treatment centers and other state licensed entities to acquire, cultivate, process, manufacture, sell, and distribute such products and accessories. Applies to Florida law, does not change or immunize violations of federal law, establishes possession limits for personal use, allows consistent legislation, defines terms, provides effective date. The amendment's financial impact primarily comes from expected sales tax collections. If legal today, sales of non-medical marijuana would be subject to sales tax and would remain so if voters approve this amendment. Based on other states' experiences, expected retail sales of non-medical marijuana would generate at least $195.6 million annually in state and local sales tax revenues once the retail market is fully operational. Although the timing of this occurring is unclear, under current law, the existing statutory framework for medical marijuana is repeated 6 months after the effective date of this amendment, which affects how this amendment will be implemented. A new regulatory structure for both medical and non-medical use of marijuana will be needed. Its design cannot be fully known until the legislator acts. However, regulatory costs will probably be offset by regulatory fees. Other potential costs and savings cannot be predicted. This proposed constitutional amendment is estimated to have a net positive impact on the state budget. This impact may result in generating additional revenue or an increase in government services. I know reading some of this stuff is droll and boring, but it was necessary for us to get through it first and read the amendment so that we can go over it in detail and have a better understanding before you guys get to the polls. So this law is for people 21 years or older to utilize marijuana recreationally. And of course, they want to regulate it so that only it can be grown by corporations, the same corporations that are already growing medical marijuana. That's where this entire thing starts to become controversial, because people who are hoping to grow marijuana and sell it, people like you and myself, people who aren't a part of one of these large corporations already in the business that want to get into it brand new and have an opportunity to make money, they're unfortunately not going to be able to participate in this market if this bill passes, if this amendment passes. And I'll cover that first, I guess, since we're talking about it now. But there was some articles out there that discussed this issue about whether or not corporations or individuals or both would be able to grow marijuana and sell it. So here's what I found out. So did corporations write Amendment 3? Yes, they did. The political committee, Smart and Safe Florida, primarily funded by a large medical marijuana producer and retailer in the state, helped and actually wrote this bill. So it is actually written by one of the corporations, and It's clear as to why they wrote it and pushed it through, because they want to be the only ones making money off of growing and selling marijuana in the state of Florida for recreational and medical purposes. So that's unfortunate for people, regular folks who wanted to maybe get in on this opportunity. It doesn't sound like it'll be possible unless this gets voted down and another opportunity for a bill like this comes up the next time, but allows for individuals to grow and sell marijuana in the state of Florida. In addition to that, there are commercials running, of course, for people to vote on 3, vote yes or no. And one of the commercials out there is making it sound like that Amendment 3 would prohibit homegrown cannabis. And this is actually not true. Now, I know we did just say that you can't grow and sell marijuana in the state of Florida if this bill passes, unless you're one of these corporations that are already doing it for medical marijuana. But nowhere in the language of the full explanation of the amendment does it expressly forbid homegrown cannabis. Once passed, a Florida legislator can add laws that would allow the cultivation of homegrown cannabis for personal use. You just wouldn't be able to sell it yourself. You'd have to use it only for personal use. Speaking of the full explanation of this amendment and personal use, it is a 20-page document that I will leave a link for in our description of this podcast. And know that in that full description, it states that 3 ounces of marijuana is what the limit would be for personal use. With that said, I don't know that the state of Florida will ever put an amendment forth that will allow individuals to get onto this gravy train and actually grow marijuana and sell it. I believe that there's just too much conflict of interest going on, and Sheriff Morris Young out of Gadsden County, he actually is the one that's supporting this bill to pass it. And surprise, surprise, Gadsden County is home to the largest medical marijuana producer in the state of Florida right now, and that company spent $80 million pushing this legalization forward since 2022. So unless you have $81 million, you probably won't get any support for an amendment that says that an individual can grow and sell in the state of Florida. That same Sheriff Young, also points out that he would like to pass Amendment 3 in the state of Florida so that we can have safe, regulated marijuana for recreational purposes. As of right now, medical marijuana in the state of Florida is tested by third-party labs. The state of Florida would certainly like to regulate recreational marijuana so that it could be lab tested just like medical marijuana. The argument here is so that there aren't pesticides and other additives that aren't healthy to the body in addition to smoking the marijuana. You really don't want to have a bunch of other chemicals in your body. I do agree that that's the way to go, that it should be regulated so that you know what you're getting, you know what's in it, you know that it's not tainted with God knows what chemicals. And of course, people will also state that maybe it's laced with something. It could be laced with another drug. And right now, the big one is fentanyl. There are a lot of rumors going around that marijuana is getting laced with fentanyl, and it's getting passed around the country this way, and people are overdosing on just smoking marijuana because it's laced with fentanyl. However, it's very difficult to find actual stories that are confirmed. I've scoured the internet, I've looked everywhere, and there haven't been many confirmed cases, if any at all. Now, Gaston County did report back in 2022 that there were 2 individuals in their county that had died from an overdose of marijuana and fentanyl. However, they haven't released any reports. They say that it's an ongoing investigation and nobody's seen any paperwork to confirm it. That said, I don't know that it's worth arguing about whether or not marijuana is laced with fentanyl. If it's really out there, is it just a myth, or is this just a scare tactic so that corporations can write amendments like this and make us say, hey, well, this is going to be the safest way to go. Let the corporations do it, let them regulate it, and we know that we're going to get safe, clean marijuana without anything laced in it that you're going to overdose on. That is a lot of people's thought process, and I can understand that. However, You certainly could lace marijuana with fentanyl. You could lace it with liquid plumber if you want. You can lace it with anything that could kill somebody. So it probably would be better to get it regulated and have it third-party tested, just so you know that the marijuana that you're smoking is safe and it's not going to kill you. So I don't think that argument holds any weight, in my honest opinion. I just think you're better off safe than sorry is all. I don't see a reason why you wouldn't want it regulated and why you wouldn't want it to be safe. It's the smart thing to do. And honestly, I would trust the corporations to do it better and safer and more efficiently and effectively than an individual. I can't trust that an individual is going to get it third-party tested. I can't trust that an individual is going to grow it without having it laced with something they shouldn't or using some pesticides they shouldn't be using. A lot of people who are individuals don't have money like corporations do. So you think corporations cut corners? Just wait until you have a person who isn't really making money, who's struggling to make his business work. Watch them cut corners. It's going to happen. They're going to do stuff that the corporation wouldn't do and get away with the third-party testing that they're going to be required to do. The person who's just an individual doing it, they're just going to do it and they're not going to let anybody know it, and they're going to sell it black market. They're going to say, well, I can grow it legally, so I'm going to go ahead and just sell it illegally without getting it tested, and I'm going to use whatever I want on it to make it grow faster, to have a better effect on an individual, not caring about the user's health. So unfortunately, yes, I think corporations do have to be the ones to make this happen. I think they are the ones that are going to have to be able to grow it and sell it, get it third-party tested. So they're going to make all the money off of this. But guess what? The people out there who want marijuana recreationally, legally in the state of Florida, you're going to get that. It's not as though you're not getting anything in return. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Florida finally has a strong possibility here to get 60% of a yes on this vote, 60% or more. And if that happens, we'll get recreational marijuana legalized in the state of Florida. But it still won't be federally legal. It'll still be illegal by federal law. The feds have rescheduled marijuana as a controlled substance on the Schedule 3 to a Schedule 1. Now that means that it's still a controlled substance. Other Schedule 1 controlled substances are things like steroids. My point is you still have to be careful. Just because the state of Florida says that you're going to be able to smoke weed recreationally doesn't mean that the federal government is okay with that. And the biggest example of that for an individual is the current federal law prohibiting purchase or possession of guns for anyone who uses marijuana, including medical marijuana. Under Title 18, Section 922 of the United States Code, it reads, "It shall be unlawful for any person to sell or otherwise dispose of any firearm or ammunition to any person knowing or having reasonable cause to believe that such person, including as a juvenile," and number 3 is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substances as defined in Section 102 of the Controlled Substances Act, 21 U.S.C. 802. That means any drug, Schedule 1 through 3, that isn't approved as a prescribed drug cannot be utilized for any reason and at the same time allowed to purchase or possess a firearm. For another example, let's look at ATF Form 4473, which is the firearms transaction record. Question 21F says, "Are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance?" Warning: the use or possession of marijuana remains unlawful under federal law regardless of whether it has been legalized or decriminalized for medicinal or recreational purposes in the state where you reside. Further down the document, it states, "I understand that a person who answers yes to any of the questions 21B through 21L, as well as 21N, is prohibited from receiving, possessing, or purchasing a firearm. I also understand that making any false oral or written statement or exhibiting any false or misrepresented identification with respect to this transaction is a crime punishable as a felony under federal law and may also violate state and/or local law." So technically, you can have marijuana legalized in your state, and if you're in the state of Florida, it already is for medicinal purposes and may soon be for recreational purposes. However, that does not mean that you can go and purchase a firearm legally. You can't even possess it legally, even after you've purchased it. So if you've already purchased it legally and now you're smoking marijuana, technically by federal law, you're not even supposed to have possession of it. Of course, nobody's going to go out and raise their hand and say, hey, Mr. ATF, I purchased this pistol legally 10 years ago, but I decided to start smoking weed 3 years ago, and I've decided that now I want to tell you about that and give you my firearm back. Nobody's doing that. So technically, you're breaking the law, but ATF is not looking for you unless you're doing some really bad stuff. So I'm not telling you to go out there and smoke weed and then lie on these forms and purchase firearms. I'm not telling you to do that. Do not lie on federal forms. But just know that you are technically lying on a federal form if you're smoking marijuana, even if it's for medicinal purposes and approved in your state, or for recreational purposes and approved in your state, and you fill out that form, that ATF form 4473, and you purchase that firearm, you are lying if you answer no on that form. Now, I don't think that the problem is with legalizing marijuana in the state of Florida, or in any state for that matter. I think the problem is with the federal government and their silly law stating that you can't own a gun if you smoke marijuana or use cannabis. I think that's ridiculous. We all know that alcohol is way worse than marijuana. People get angry on alcohol when they get drunk. They become dangerous. That's why you can't have your gun in a bar where they're serving alcohol. And especially if that's your intention to go to that place, if it's only for you so that you can drink, you're not allowed to do that. And there's a reason for that. And that's because they don't want you getting angry, get into a fight, and then shoot somebody. Now, I'm not saying that people who smoke weed and get high don't get angry and don't get into fights and don't shoot people. I'm certain there are tons of people who smoke pot and get angry and get into fights and shoot other people, but they're probably in gangs, and they were probably already angry and planning on getting into a fight and planning on shooting somebody. So I don't think the regular person like you or myself, who are already in control of our faculties, are going to lose those faculties while smoking weed enough to where we're going to get angry and get into a fight and shoot someone. So the law federally, I think, is dumb, and that's my opinion. However, you should still be aware of how it affects you. You don't want to be ignorant of that law. You should be informed of it. So know what happens if marijuana in Florida is legalized and you decide to go buy a firearm and you've been smoking marijuana legally in Florida and you fill out that form. Just know how you fill it out and be aware of the federal laws that are still in play. Now, the state of Florida will still allow you to have a concealed carry permit and conceal carry your weapon even if you are smoking marijuana medicinally right now. And I assume that Florida would allow that to continue if it becomes a recreational drug. The federal government is still in disagreement with the state of Florida about this, but the state of Florida has done a good job of maintaining your right to carry a firearm and own a firearm in the state of Florida. Nikki Fried, the former Florida agricultural commissioner a few years ago, had a medical marijuana card and also a concealed carry permit. Her office made it clear that they will not deny gun rights to medical marijuana patients, and her official statement was, on concealed weapons, licenses, and medical marijuana cards, the issue is pretty clear. Florida Statute 790.06 provides a limited list of factors upon which our department must approve or deny a concealed weapons license. Therefore, the department is prohibited from asking questions outside that scope, which would include medical marijuana card possession. But again, still understand that it is illegal, regardless if it's medicinal or recreational, and it's illegal in the state. It's still illegal federally to own a firearm while smoking marijuana. All right, let's go back to one of the things they talked about in the amendment, which was money. They were talking about taxes and revenue. Well, there are currently 24 states in the United States of America that allow recreational marijuana. and they have an excise tax on that. And if you look at the states that have recreational marijuana, the tax could be anywhere from 6% to 37%. And that's in addition to the regular state and local sales tax. So the tax can be pretty steep, and a lot of people are worried about that it's going to increase the cost of marijuana, that it's going to increase it much more than what they can get it for now off the street. And I understand the concern for that, but again, it's going to be regulated. You know it's going to be safe. You know that they're going to be third-party testing it. This is the way to get it and decriminalize it and not worry about people going to jail for possession or getting a fine. I think is mostly what they do now is they write you a ticket, a fine for having X amount unless it's over that personal use, and then they send you to jail. So as of right now, we don't know what those excise taxes are going to be, but I can assume that it'll be anywhere between 6 and 37%. Revenue from those excise taxes on marijuana are traditionally used for funding programs related to the drug or harmful effects from prior drug law enforcement agencies and the laws that they utilize to enact drug policies. There are no taxes on medical marijuana, so that will remain the same. They suspect as of right now that there will be about a $200 million revenue for the sale of marijuana in the state of Florida. Let's talk about the repeal, because they did mention repealing the current law for medical marijuana in the state of Florida, which would happen about 6 months after this would be passed. So if this gets passed, they would have to repeal the original law that was put into play for medicinal marijuana, because this new one is going to encompass both medicinal and recreational, and one has to be removed before the new one can be put in place. Likely the legislators would get ahead of the game and make sure that the new law is ready to go before the other one is appealed so that it can happen without too much delay in between, if any at all. The reason for that is that we don't want to have people that are utilizing medicinal marijuana for treatment and have a period of time where they're not able to get it. That could happen if they drag their feet on this. So hopefully they won't, and I don't think they will, because these corporations that are lobbying to get this passed, well, they'll lose money because they won't be able to grow and sell marijuana legally in the state, not for medicinal or for recreational purposes, until this gets put into place after the other one's repealed. And there's a period between the two laws where there's no law in place for recreational or medicinal purposes. Then it will be illegal in the state of Florida during that period of time, and they'll lose money. And these lobbyists, these companies, they are not going to let the legislators do that, and the legislators aren't going to allow it either, because I'm sure they're already working on this. Now I want to talk about driving while impaired on marijuana, because there are some people who don't want to vote this in because they are worried about there being yet another drug on the market that is just going to be more available and cause people to go out and drive while they're high, opposed to while they're drunk, and get into the same sorts of accidents and cause the same sorts of trouble on the road and be just as dangerous because they're high on marijuana. Now, I understand that, and I do agree with their concern. And there was actually a study recently from Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health, and it said that specifically between 2016 and 2019, 42% of drivers with past year alcohol and cannabis use reported any and all past year DUIs. And when doing so, 8% of the DUIs were alcohol only, 20% of the DUIs were cannabis only, and 14% of the DUIs were alcohol and cannabis. That's quite interesting. So the least amount of DUIs are done by people who are drinking alcohol by itself. The most of them doing DUIs are people who are smoking weed by themselves. And then there's that middle where they're doing both alcohol and cannabis. That's when we look at alcohol by itself, cannabis by itself, or alcohol and cannabis. The rest of it, the majority of it, is alcohol along with other things like cocaine and methamphetamines and all other kinds of stuff, heroin. So most of the DUIs are actually happening with alcohol and a bunch of other drugs. not alcohol and cannabis. But cannabis seems to be one of the higher DUI drugs on its own. Now, I don't know if that's going to mean that just because it becomes more available and recreationally legal that that number is going to increase. Makes me wonder that maybe those people are doing it anyways. Maybe those people would do it anyways, whether it's legal or not. It's not as though it's hard to get. It's not hard to get marijuana. It never has been, and it never will. It's just a matter of who's going to make the money off of it, and that's what this bill's really about. But I want to speak about this fairly. So those are the numbers. 8% of DUIs nationally were alcohol only. 20% of them were cannabis only. Another study from Colorado reported that drivers, 18% of marijuana users in Colorado, drove 2 to 3 hours after consumption. The statistic is interesting because the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at the University of California found that participants did not fully recover until about 4.5 hours after consumption. So 2 to 3 hours is when 18%, almost a fifth of people who smoke marijuana would drive. But there was almost another hour and a half to a half an hour of time that they needed to wait before they should really drive, because the effects of the marijuana within that time period could still create enough impairment to cause an accident. All right, and the last topic and concern that I want to get into is the risk of cannabis developing a psychotic disorder. I know some of you are probably laughing about this or rolling your eyes or scoffing, but there have been studies done recently that show that there is a link between schizophrenia and marijuana. I'll go ahead and read this straight from the NIH.gov website. It says, there is now reasonable evidence from longitudinal studies that regular cannabis use predicts an increased risk of schizophrenia and of reporting psychotic symptoms. These relationships have persisted after controlling for confounding variables such as personal characteristics and other drug use. Regular cannabis use and psychotic disorders, such as schizophrenia, are associated in the general population, and heavy cannabis users are overrepresented among new cases of schizophrenia. These findings and rising rates of cannabis use among young people in many developed countries have prompted debates about whether cannabis may be a contributing cause of psychosis. That is, it may precipitate schizophrenia in vulnerable individuals. The hypothesis assumes that cannabis use is one factor among many others, including genetic predisposition and other unknown causes, that together causes schizophrenia. The consistent finding of an association between cannabis use and psychosis makes chance an unlikely explanation of the association, and there are also now a number of prospective studies showing that cannabis use often precedes psychosis. Well, that sucks, because I believe that that's true. I wholeheartedly believe that. I know people who have smoked too much marijuana and they're not all there anymore. They were there before. They were logical people. They were cool to hang around with, but they are super paranoid now. They've totally lost it. They are not in touch with reality, and it's really sad to see. It's been really upsetting to be a friend or family member of these individuals. Now, I'm not saying this happens to everybody who smokes marijuana. I actually think it happens to the minority of people who smoke marijuana. I don't have anything to prove that. I don't have any statistics in front of me or studies in front of me that says what the percentage is. But my experience, my anecdotal experience, of course, is knowing the people that do smoke. There's a small percentage of them that I know personally that have gone off the deep end and unfortunately lost themselves. Therefore, I think some people might be predisposed to psychosis or schizophrenia from smoking marijuana, especially if they smoke a lot of it. And those individuals are probably genetically predisposed, and it's likely because they may have a family history of mental illness. And before you decide to smoke marijuana recreationally or medicinally, you certainly want to know whether or not there's any predisposition in your family for psychosis or schizophrenia or any other kind of mental illness, because you certainly don't want to find yourself in a position to where you become mentally compromised. All of that said, throughout this entire episode, with all the positives and all the negatives, I still think it should be legalized. I think it should be legalized medicinally, which it already is in the state of Florida, and it should be legalized recreationally. I think we should become the 25th state to approve recreational marijuana. I think all 50 states should approve for recreational medicinal marijuana. I'd be interested to know what you think about legalizing marijuana recreationally in the state of Florida. Feel free to leave a comment, and I hope you really enjoyed this episode, and I can't wait to do the next one. We'll see you next time. Be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button to continue following us and listening to our podcast. I promise we'll get better and more interesting with each episode. My name's Tony DeVito, and we'll see you next time.